Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Hi, welcome to Greg. Thanks for being with us here today. So just wait for people to join. Hi, everybody. Hi, Sophie. Hi, Lana. Okay, so thanks for everybody for joining our sessions today. We are going to be talking all about timber flooring. When it comes to selecting your flooring, obviously that's a major consideration for any renovation project. And obviously you want to choose the flooring that's right for you and your family and your uses, but you also want to make sure that that flooring is going to stand the test of time. And so we've got Greg here today from Havwoods. Greg is head of technical at Havwoods, which means that he knows everything there is to know about timber flooring. And how to not only specify it, but how to look after it and make sure that it's going to be a worthwhile investment for your project. So today we're going to be talking through all the aspects of that decision-making process right to the installation and beyond. So Greg, would you like to take it from there?
Hi everybody. Yeah, thank you very much for joining. Yeah, so as I've said, it's that I've been working in timber flooring for about 15 years plus as an installer, and also working on the manufacturing side. And I go out to our sawmills and check quality and things like that. So any technical questions that you have, we'll come to at the end. What I will probably do now is start the presentation, if that's okay with
yes
you,
I should have said we'll do the presentation for probably take us about, we said, between 25-30 minutes, and then we're opening the floor to all the questions that we're going to do for about a quarter of an hour after that. So
okay, brilliant. Okay, so we'll get going. Let me just bring up the slides for everybody. Okay, I've titled it "How to Care for Your Floor." Maybe we could have. It's kind of how to select and care for your floor, I suppose. So I'm talking the idea that I'm trying to kind of get across to everybody today is picking the right product and what the lifetime of that product is going to look like, and the things that we need to do in order to keep timber flooring looking the way that we want it to over the lifetime of your building. So when we talk about timber floors, I'll go through a little bit about what they are, the different types, constructions, the finishes that we can choose, and what's entailed in each of those, and also kind of some of the practical properties of wood as a material in our homes, how we're trying to achieve when we're trying to achieve a certain look for our project, what kind of things do we need to keep in consideration to get exactly where we want it to, and also about the lifespan of the floor, because timber is quite unique in that it kind of lives the life of the building with you, and you're able to kind of adapt it throughout time to suit those different kind of designs that you might go through over the lifespan of a building. So a timber floor, when we're talking about a wooden floor, there's three kind of main constituent parts. The bit that we see, which dictates kind of the color and our perceived kind of performance, a lot of the performance factors, is the finish. So that's going to be about the color, the texture, and the sheen, things like this that are going to really have that visual impact on the space that we're working with. The material itself is kind of the timber, be that an engineered or a solid construction. Which species of timber are we going for? And there's also going to be a big aesthetic part to that, because when we're selecting the timber, we're doing things like selecting the grading of the material. So trees have branches which in a timber floor will create knots, and there's lots of varied features within a timber floor, which we're going to see, because they are just the natural elements of the tree. So the selection that we choose and part of the color and the finish will give the overall impact of what that would give in the space, but it will also give a little bit of performance. Some species are harder than others, they're denser than others. And then the bit that I'm not going to talk too much about, but I will talk about it, is the substrate, which is the base that floor goes onto. It's quite important just to know what needs to happen before the timber floor goes in. But what I'll really talk about here is the type of fixing methods that we might use, be it a floating installation, a bonded installation, or even, you know, kind of, if we're talking something that's a bit more classic, even a nailed down installation kind of onto joists as a classic timber floor. So here's some pictures of some chopped up pieces of wood and a diagram of how we chop up pieces of wood. The way that we cut timber is going to dictate slightly the appearance of the timber in the material. So when we're talking about big wide planks, normally we're talking about kind of flat sawn or plain sawn pieces of timber, which is you take your trunk of your tree, you take the bark off, you cut it into something more rectangular rather than being circular, and then you take slices of that. Now, what happens with that is it's a less selective kind of process, and you obviously get all of the features of the tree that you'll see. So on wider planks, you'll quite often see more features of timber, and then depending on how wide those planks are, or the length of the boards, things like that, they're going to dictate how frequent things like larger knots from branches or some kind of pockets of sapwood and things like that might be within the material. When we go to slightly smaller formats of timber, we can be slightly more selective. So quite often this happens with narrower planks or herringbone, chevron type pieces. We might use different types of cutting the timber to achieve those really clean pieces of material where we can select around the branches, and then you'll end up with slightly more kind of uniform grain structures and slightly less character coming into the actual material, the flooring itself. So just to kind of give an example of, on a wider, bigger plank, generally you'll see more character. Even when it's a more selected grade, you're still going to see more probably color variation and bigger variation of structures and things within the timber than if you go for something that's smaller and has a more selective process. So I'll talk about solid constructions of timber. They're not quite so commonly used. They're less popular these days because of things like underfloor heating, but we'll talk about that. A solid timber is that slice of tree that we were seeing in the picture before, which has then been dried down to a specific moisture content, and it's then profiled. Normally, this is going to be either nailed to joists, directly to the joists as a structural timber floor, or it's going to be glued down to a substrate. You wouldn't normally float a solid timber floor, and the finishes on them are normally a bit more simple because of the fact that they don't quite have the same level of stability to them, because all of the natural elements of timber, at the end of the day, we are cutting rectangular things out of round things. There's the potential there's more potential for movement in a solid timber floor, so it limits some of the processes and things that you can do with them. They're still absolutely beautiful materials. So yeah, that's it. But they're not normally recommended because of that potential for a bit more movement that they exhibit. They're not normally recommended for uses on underfloor heating, because you're more likely to see. It's not that they will kind of fail, if you like, but it's because they will do things that we don't want them to do, and that's generally why they're not recommended for use on underfloor heating. Some of them might be, and those will go through very, very specific drying processes and things like that, and maybe they will be okay for underfloor heating, but only up to certain sizes of material. So engineered construction, which is what you will see the majority of timber floors, they work on the same principle, every single one of them. Although there's different constructions and of engineered flooring, they all kind of work by cross-balancing timber. So they use the natural principle of timber, which is that it will move more across its width than it will along its length, and then by alternating the direction that those layers are then pressed together in, that helps to counteract, each layer helps to counteract the one above it and the one below it, and you create a more stable principle, which is the same thing that you see in things like cross-laminated timber constructions for buildings or plywood construction. So that's kind of the idea of engineered constructions, and the beautiful thing about the engineered constructions is you're able to do some very interesting processes. You can expose them to a bit more heat and things during the manufacturing, which means that you can get multiple different colors built up onto the surfaces, get some really interesting design finishes on them without the timber wanting to kind of move and react to those processes. And also related to that means that you get better performance over underfloor heating. Because that cross-lamination principle that's used, it means that you develop a much more stable product.
Great. Oh yeah.
And so in these are just some different types of engineered constructions that you will see, but they are essentially they're essentially the same principle in that they have a stabilizing element to them.
Right, so I just think we've got a couple of questions around this actually, and I had a question which I think is a good time to talk about this. So you were talking about underfloor heating. So this engineered construction is definitely the floor that would be recommended for underfloor heating situations.
Yeah, but through the cross lamination, you tend to remove at least half of you at least half the amount of movement that you will see in the timber floor. It can vary slightly between the constructions, but you take away 50 to 75% of the movement that a solid timber floor would exhibit over underfloor heating generally. Yeah.
And is there anything else that people should consider in that underfloor heating installation?
Yeah, it's mainly to do with the substrate. It's about how close the pipes are to the back of the boards. You don't want the pipes right up against the back of the boards, because there's two things. You don't get even heat distribution then, because you want a layer of something to heat, which then transfers the heat to the timber. Get a nice even transfer. So don't have your pipes right at the top of your substrate and then your timber floor right up against it. Always try and have something else there. And also just things to do with your project. Make sure that there's not lots of moisture from if there's been concrete poured, cementitious screeds and things that will go over the pipes. Make sure that that's not really wet when the underfloor heating comes on and the timber floor's on top of it, because you're going to push lots and lots of moisture from beneath into the timber floor, and then you are going to see, regardless of the construction, you're going to see quite a lot of movement. But there's different ways of using that, of suppressing that moisture, and as long as you're using a contractor who really knows what they're doing, you can suppress that moisture down, or you can get the moisture out and cool the floor off before you lay the floor itself.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you. I think we'll have a couple more questions at the end. Do you want to carry on, and we'll come back to some of this?
Yeah, I'll carry on. I'll try not to get too kind of bogged down in the details. Yep. So I will talk about some finishing options now, because when I talked about the timber floor being three things, I've kind of covered what the material is briefly. We can touch on it more if people have specific questions, and then what we see is the finish a lot of the time. And these finishing options, and what are the different finishes, and where might they be more appropriate to you? What are the different kind of fundamental characteristics within those finishes that you might choose? Okay. So this diagram, hopefully it's clear enough. There's three main groups of finishes that you will get on timber floors. You get a natural oil. Natural oils are kind of an open finish. The oils, they soak into the timber and then they dry off and harden, but they always remain slightly live. And what happens with a natural oiled floor, normally it will have oil applied at the factory, and then when it's delivered, it will need additional oil adding to it because of that kind of live nature of it, the way it soaks into the timber. You're going to want to kind of dress the top of the floor with additional oil. Things like kind of really traditional soaped finishes and things like that. They're similar to the natural oils as well. A UV oil is a UV cured oil, so it goes through a UV curing process, which allows the oils to then firm up and do what we call film form. So they will form a layer, and then you can add another layer on the top and build them up. And these are very similar to hard wax oils as well. So UV oils and hard wax oils are in the same family. They will have oils that penetrate into the timber, but they will also have waxes and resins which sit at the top and give an abrasion resistant layer, and they're more of a closed finish. They're kind of a microporous type finish, but they're essentially a closed finish, and they don't need any additional oil adding to them after they're installed. And then lacquers are multiple layers of polymers, polyurethane, which will be built up over the surface of the timber, and you can go from kind of gloss to ultra matte sheen within those. They give the highest durability because they have the highest build on top of the surface. Sometimes what people will say people don't like about them is they give a higher level of uniformity, and you don't get as much texture from them generally. So that's kind of one of the main things. Where the oil-based finishes, you get a bit more of that natural texture through the floor. The lacquers are a little bit more uniform, but it kind of depends. It kind of depends on what's what. With the UV, when we're talking about colors in floors, the nice thing about natural oils and UV oils is you can buy colored oil products which you can reapply to the floor over their lifespan, whereas with lacquers they're kind of sealed underneath the clear coats, so there's no way of reintroducing the color over their lifetime, or it's difficult to reintroduce any color over their lifetime. It's easier with oiled finishes, so I should probably mention that now, but I'll also talk about that on the maintenance section coming up. So I've just given some different examples of kind of comparable finishes, which might allow people to see what I mean, because that diagram before, maybe isn't always particularly clear. So here is an example of a white lacquered parquet floor. So this is a chevron. Is it a chevron or a herringbone pattern? It's a chevron or a herringbone pattern, and it gives a much more uniform appearance to the floor. You still see the variation, and that's one thing I should probably mention. Make sure that everybody knows what to expect with a timber floor. You will always have variation because different pieces of timber are different colors. They are different tones. You have even just within oak, which is the most commonly used species, you have some richer, darker brown pieces of timber and some very light, almost blonde colored pieces of timber. And whatever finish you put onto that, you will still get that natural variation and characteristics coming through, because we don't want to blank out the wood completely, because that's the beauty of it, is seeing that variation and the natural characteristics of the timber. We want to be kind of celebrating that while also getting the right kind of color scheme that we're looking for our interior scheme. So this is a white lacquered finish, and as an example, best thing to do is to compare it to a white UV oiled finish. So in a white UV oiled finish, you'll see here that you can see more variation, but you also get more texture, and you get a slightly softer tone. So you get less uniformity and a slightly softer, less visible finish, I suppose, would be the way I would term it, and you just get a different look between the two. Both of them are really nice finishes, and one, you can't get that higher level of uniformity from the oil, and you can't get that soft, warm depth as easily with a lacquer. So that's kind of some of the main principles there. Cleaning and maintenance, I'll just start going through the different the different principles with them. So using the right type of cleaner and cleaning in the right type of way is, regardless of which type of finish you have, if you use the right type of cleaner and use the right amount of water, the right dilution of cleaning solution, that's the first thing that's great. We tend to generally recommend not going for supermarket bought cleaners, just because they don't tend to be pH neutral. So going with a flooring brand cleaner is always going to help. This is in a hotel. The image here is from a hotel, and that hotel was installed for, I think, 5 years by the time I went there, and had never had anything other than its day-to-day cleaning regime. So it's just a bit of showing that even in really high traffic hotel lobbies, with the right cleaning regime, a floor can look fantastic. And there's things that we can do to make life easier, having furniture feet on our furniture. Anytime we've got metal or blunt furniture legs, making sure that we have soft felt things there, caster cups underneath really heavy pieces of furniture, and making sure that we always have barrier matting in place, taking that contamination off of feet before we come into before we come into a property. Most people, if we're talking about residential, most people take their shoes off. Not everybody takes their shoes off, though. If you're not going to take your shoes off, you need to consider that you're going to need to have a more rigorous cleaning regime, I suppose, because you're going to bring more external contaminants into your home and onto your floor.
Greg, I was going to ask some questions, but we've got so many questions in the chat that I think we'll just wait for the end, and then we'll jump straight on to everybody's questions that you can walk.
Yeah, that's fine. I will. I've just got a few more slides that I will go through, and I'll jump into everybody's questions.
Yeah.
So I can see. Really, I love the fact that people got so many questions to ask, and I want to make sure I can get to all of them. So I won't dwell too much on the specifics of cleaning regimes, although I could probably talk about it for a ridiculous amount of time. So day-to-day cleaning. Yeah, generally we say sweep and vacuum your floor. Use the right amount of cleaning solution. Spray mops are fantastic for this. So they have the small reservoir cartridges. They put down a controlled amount of timber. Make sure that you, and with the spray mops as well, you've got cleaning heads that you can take off, wash, and then put another one on. So just make sure you're doing that regularly. Otherwise, you don't want to just be reintroducing the same dirty water to the floor. And I suppose that's it. There will always be guides and videos. Havwoods we have videos on our website showing how we would recommend doing cleaning. Maintenance products, they tend to be designed for DIY usage. They're very quick drying and kind of slightly more lightweight products, but they're nice and easy to use. You can get kind of white oils and things like that, which help you to refresh those white colors if you're going for those white oiled floors. And depending on the product, you can normally use them to either patch in small areas or apply it to the whole floor as a refresh. Professional cleaning. This was in this is a white floor that hadn't been cleaned, and you can see the difference that professional cleaning can make when you use a really strong cleaner, and if that dirt is allowed to kind of build up and things. Use a really strong cleaner and the right technique, and you'll be able to really lift that from the floor. So the picture on the right of these two shows the kind of before and after of what was achieved there. And then refinishing. So one of the main things about timber floors is that you can change the color of them through their life within your property. So the floor that went down was a kind of a honey colored, rich, warm floor on the left, and that had been down for several years. The customer, this is from these images were supplied from a contractor that I know quite well, and the customer then went, "Oh, I really love this color." and then they went away and they did a couple of samples and they went, okay, yeah, I can achieve that color on site for you. This kind of coffee chocolate, richer brown tone. And they took a sample of Havwoods flooring from the Havwoods showroom, and that's laid on top of the floor, showing how close they got the floor to the sample that the customer gave. So finding the right contractor to do that, and you're able to change the finish, and it's not particularly intrusive. It doesn't take loads and loads of life out of your floor. It doesn't create giant plumes of dust or anything like that. Modern sanding techniques, when you've got a professional contractor, they're quick, and they're relatively low dust. They're very low dust, really, considering the work that's going on. And you can go from a white floor to a black floor, or to a grey floor, whatever type of floor you like over the lifespan. Wooden floors are the only flooring where you can change the colour of the floor entirely in its lifetime without having to take up the floor and lay a new one, which I think is one of the brilliant kind of features of them. This was the point where I was going to leave it open for some leave it open for questions, which we have lots of. So thank you.
I will start pulling these up. Thank you so much. I've got loads of questions of my own that I want to ask, but I'm going to start with everyone else's first. So I'm going to say this. So Debbie says, interested in options for wood in a kitchen plus underfloor heating.
Yeah, okay. So kitchens, obviously you have some slightly different demands than you do to other rooms in the house because of the types of spillage and contamination, flecks of oil spitting from when you're using pans and things like that, which will go onto the floor. So it's just about one of those things of when you're going into a kitchen, making sure that it's meeting your kind of maintenance regime. If you're going for a white oiled floor in a kitchen, you might have to be doing, be cleaning several times, be doing kind of damp mopping using that spray mop several times a week, whereas if you go for something that's a darker, warmer color in this tone, it might bring down the amount of cleaning you're having to do. So it's just about one of those things of looking at how often you want to be doing cleaning and things like that.
Would you recommend?
So that would be.
I guess a kitchen is like very high traffic because you're walking around from place to place. Would you recommend a lacquer over an oiled floor for that situation, or do you think both of
it's not? Yeah, I mean it's not a bad idea. It would probably be a recommendation. I would say a lacquer is a good idea. And the other thing to say also is that if you really love the color of a UV oil finish, but you want to put it in a kitchen and you don't want to have kind of too much maintenance, you can then ask the installer, if you're using a professional timber flooring installer, you can ask them to apply a coat of lacquer on the floor after they've installed it, and that would really help, and that can help as well. And you tend to be able to match the sheen. Like I say, you might lose a little bit of the texture, but if the maintenance is more important and the ease of cleaning, then yeah, go for that. Underfloor heating, I hope I covered that. Just generally go for an engineered construction, and you should be fine.
Thank you. Next question from Andrew. What considerations do we need to take into account if we want to have underfloor heating with a underfloor? Oh, we've already covered that slightly. Is there anything else? I thought there was something about kind of checking with your underfloor heating people the max temperature which your heating is going to get to.
Yeah, that was the only other point I was going to make actually, is generally what we say with timber floors is the surface temperature generated by underfloor heating. We don't really like that to get outside of a kind of 27, 29 absolute maximum centigrade degrees C temperature, because you don't want to take the moisture content of the timber floor down below 5%, because that's when it starts to almost it's not in a comfortable zone. So you want to by keeping those surface temperatures out of those excessive temperatures that you might generate with tiled floors, for example. So it's quite important to, when the guys are putting the underfloor heating in, the temperature at the manifold is quite important, which is the actual mixer between the cold and the hot water. Because if you set that at 55 degrees, for example, that's going to be too hot for a timber floor. It might be what you would do for tiling, or if you've got carpet, because obviously carpets have got insulating properties, so you want to set things quite high. But for timber floors, and also some other types of flooring like resilient flooring, you don't want to get those too hot, because they'll react to temperature as well. So you tend to drop that down to the kind of 40-45 degree at the mixer, which means you tend to get in that kind of high 20s surface temperature actually in operation.
Yeah. And is there a difference between, I know some people do put electric underfloor heating or wet, and wet, is there a difference between the two, or is there things that you should know?
So electric you don't have to worry about overheating floors generally, because they're a bit more gentle. The thing about electric is there's a lot of loose laid electric systems, and you have to be careful that you're not wanting a floor that needs to be glued down and then buying a loose laid system, because that's not going to work. So if you've got a herringbone floor, for example, that's going to need to be glued down, or you've got wide planks that need to be glued down, tongue and groove flooring in general, those are generally going to want to go with a cable system that needs to, which goes into kind of something that's fixed into the substrate. So what happens is you get what's called a loose cable system, and they come on these wire mesh mats. They stick to the floor, and then you put a leveling compound over them, so a very thin cementitious product, about kind of 6 to 10 millimeters, and then you would glue your floor down to that. So if you're looking at glued down floors, you need to go with a glued down, the appropriate electric system, because the foil mats and the carbon films are only designed for floated floors to go on top of them.
Right. So you either have to choose your setup and then go and choose a floor to match, or the other way around.
Yeah. You just need to make sure that the two meet up correctly. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Kelly is asking, if you have existing engineered wooden floors but are not happy with the color, can you sand them to lighten them?
Yeah, absolutely. It will depend slightly what species they are. You know, if you've got a dark species of timber, you know, but most commonly used timbers are oak, ash, walnut. Walnut is a richer brown color, but even then, if you can, depending on the color you pick, so with walnut, for example, if you go for an oiled finish, it will make it quite a deep rich brown. But then if you go for a lacquered finish, something designed to not develop the color, then it will give you a lighter tone. And you can even go with white oils or white lacquers, white pigmented lacquers and things. So yeah, there are ways of, there's lots of options. It's just about finding the right contractor who's experienced in using different types of finishes. You know, if you're sanding and refinishing a floor, you want a specialist, particularly if you're trying to generate a light floor. They're the hardest ones.
I was just going to ask about the wear layers. So often when you're looking around engineered flooring samples, you get lots of different thicknesses available to you. Like, is there anything that you would recommend in terms of the thickness, in terms of longevity and the sanding down?
Yeah, so there's two things. With underfloor heating, you don't tend to want to go for like a really thick product, just because the heating has to work harder. It's not as reactive, and you can build a bit more stress in the floor. So when it's underfloor heating, we tend to recommend a product that's between kind of 10 and 15 mil. 10-15 millimeter total thickness. Yeah. Now the type of construction that you have will dictate kind of how thick the wear layer is a lot of the time as well. So a plywood backed product will tend to have a slightly thicker wear layer as its overall build up, because they're slightly more rigid. And then the 3-layer products, which are like the click systems, and they have the softwood fingers in the core, they will have a slightly thinner wear layer, but what you do get from them is the ability to do floated installs, and they're also kind of they're really good at dealing with humidity changes and things in those constructions. So there's a few different options and things with wear layer thickness. Most of the time, you don't have to worry in a residential environment. because if you get a product that normally it's going to have at least 2.5 millimeters of wear layer, which means you're going to be able to sand it at least twice over its lifetime. You generally, most engineered floors would be 2.5 to 4 on their thickness. There are some 6 millimeter wear layer products that you'll get. They tend to be more for commercial usages because you're getting more towards we were going to have a solid timber floor and we needed what a solid timber floor would give us, but we need an engineered that acts like a solid in that sense. But a 6 mil wear layer it's probably going to last 100 years in a residential environment. So it might be a bit of kind of almost an over specification, particularly if you've got underfloor heating. You probably want to go for something.
So you're not adverse to a 3 mil wear layer. You think that's great to know, because I've always
I've got one in my own house. I have a 3 mil wear layer in the floor in my own house.
Okay,
so
great.
I can't really say much more than that.
I think I over specified mine. That's good to know. We'll go with Justine has a question. We have engineered oak flooring from a well-known joinery chain on a traditional wooden subfloor. It bows every autumn. This is quite noticeably and has bleached a lot over the years. How do we avoid this happening again? And when we renovate, would like a herringbone wooden floor.
Yeah. So Justine, it sounds like Justine's looking at renovating. So if most likely if you've got seasonal movement in the floor like that, it's probably a floated floor because they're separate from the substrate and they'll move up. I can't imagine that you would get that with a glued down floor. So one of the things that I would look at is maybe, particularly if you're having a herringbone floor, most herringbone floors are going to need to be glued down anyway. So what I would look at is what can we do to stabilize the substrate that the floor is going to go onto. So we'll look at that and go, do we need to put a thin layer of plywood over the top that's going to be glued down, that is going to help add a bit of stability before we glue down our timber floor. There's different things that you could look at. If you're on that traditional build-up, can't imagine it's the joists and that timber. So either the timber underneath isn't fixed to the joists properly, or the timber floor isn't fixed to the substrate. And then what you're getting is where they've installed that floated floor, there's not enough perimeter movement allowance. And when it's trying to expand, it's basically pressing against something and trying to raise away from the substrate. That's generally what would cause that. If you go for make sure that the subfloor's fixed down to the joist really well, and that you glue down your new herringbone floor, and that there shouldn't be any reason that it would be able to lift.
And you've just mentioned there that kind of circumference that you have as an expansion area at the edge of the floors. So that's something to watch when, or talk to your contractor about, that you're making sure that you have the correct width there. Is that something that when somebody's purchasing a floor, do you say what that size should be? Like, how do they?
Yes, it's a standard 10 millimeters for basic. That's actually a British standard requirement that you shouldn't ever have, and that's for glued down and floated floors. But with a glued down floor, definitely glued down floor, you've got more allowance around that. So if you want to run the floor continuously from one room to the next room to the next room without having breaks like thresholds and door bars and things, then that's where a floor really needs to be glued down. Because with floated floors, because they're not connected to the substrate, what happens is when you run them through doorways, you get pinch points where the floor narrows, and any stress from the floor trying to expand and contract will focus on those areas. And also, particularly if you're wanting to build on heavy joinery units, or you're going to have extremely kind of heavy details, or like I say, continuous flowing floors. Gluing down in those situations is the best idea, because you're not leaving yourself open to developing those pinch points, which can create movement and deflection in the floor, which can drive people mad, I suppose, in their homes with those installs.
That's really good to know. Okay, Heather has a question. I have a question about underlay insulation. We have an engineered wooden floor that we're about to install over a concrete floor that was poured in situ on the first floor above a garage. We have insulated the soffit of the garage, but there's no insulation on the concrete floor due to height restrictions. We're installing a low-level retrofit underfloor heating system, and then we're planning to put flooring on top. But should we use any kind of insulation on top of the underfloor heating beneath the flooring?
So it's going to depend a little bit on the system. So this looks like a low level. I don't know if we're talking about a wet or a electric. I don't know if we're talking about a water pipe or an electric underfloor heating system here.
If you
I'm
could
guessing
say that, Heather, actually will look out for your answer, but yeah.
A wet system. Okay, so they're overlay panels. Okay, so these overlay panels, yeah. So okay, so let me just scan the question again. Something goes insulation. You shouldn't need to put any insulation there. The heat shouldn't kind of transfer down too much. Generally,
would you put something under the underfloor heating unit? So because obviously you don't want to put anything on top of it.
Yeah. Well, the underfloor heating panels, there are some things that can go under it. There's like resilient rubber layers and things like that, which might help. So it'd be like a rubber layer that would be glued down, and then you would glue the underfloor heating panels to it. That would normally be for acoustics rather than thermal properties. I don't think you're going to have to worry about the thermal elements so much. This is one of the systems I was talking about before, where the pipes are really close to the back of the floorboards. So what I would say is, where you're going with an engineered wooden floor on top of this type of system, is don't just have the pipes in the panels and then put your wooden floor straight on top of it, because the direct heat transfer is so much, it is very intense. And what you can develop is hot spots on the timber floor where you might cause like individual pieces to shrink or maybe even crack. So just by putting something thin there, what I would normally recommend is like a hardy backer board, which is a cement based board that's used as a tile backer. But what they're really good at is heat distribution. So if you glue a layer of, and they're only 6mm thick, but if you glue a layer of 6mm thick hardy backer board onto that and then put your timber floor down, I'm not sure if you're gluing down your your underfloor, your engineered floor here, or if you're floating it. But if you're floating, it will need a thin underlay, because you can't just put a floating floor straight onto any substrate without having a kind of a foam type underlay that stops it slapping essentially against the subfloor when you move it. Okay, you're going to glue it. Yeah, so I would go underfloor heating panels, 6mm of hardy backer board, and then glue your engineered floor to that. And this is another thing where I was saying about at the manifold, the temperature that they set the flow for the area, make sure they're not just setting it to like 50 or 55 degrees, because it's going to be so hot. And it doesn't matter what engineered floor you put in there and who made it and where it came from, it's going to be very, very hot, and you've got potential for it to overheat the floor. So just make sure that they're not sending, kind of very, very hot water through those pipes. It needs to just be at the right temperature to heat the room, but not overheat the timber. So generally in that kind of 40-degree range, something like that, I would say, normally.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Let's have a look. Anna is asking, could you talk about the benefits of different types of fixing, e.g. tongue and groove? That's a great question. I'd like to know about that.
Tongue and groove fixing. So the thing about tongue and groove fixing is it allows you to. It's been used for generations. In terms of you can do everything with tongue and groove fixing. So you want versi panels, herringbone pattern, chevron pattern. Endless versi, mansion weave, like any of these kind of patterns and things you can do, because it's tongue and groove and they're meeting up. And if you want to meet a plank with a herringbone floor and then move into a chevron in another area, so these really nice kind of designs where people those generally tongue and groove is going to be the best for that. For glued down, really traditional, high skilled installs, tongue and groove flooring is the best. Where click system comes in is for floating floors, particularly over underfloor heating. Floating floors over underfloor heating, they put quite a lot of stress into the floor, so they're very stable constructions, those click systems. And what they did, because they interlock physically one plank with the plank next to it, and what it does is it creates a floor system rather than individual planks. It creates kind of a system of planks, and they're almost one entity. So with those click system floors, what they allow you to do is floated installs over underfloor heating. They also will allow you quicker installs, and they're really good for DIY and price and reaching certain price points, because they're faster to install. And also things like acoustics, just as an example, if you're going to put a timber floor onto a concrete subfloor, and you're worried about acoustics, you need to glue in a layer of like a resilient rubber that I was talking about before. That can add a fair amount of cost, whereas with a floating floor or a click system, this could be tongue and groove as well, depending on whether you've got underfloor heating or not. But with a floating floor, what you can do is add quite a lot of sound cushioning it very cheaply, because they're not expensive products. And so that 22, 23 decibels that maybe was costing, I don't know, £4 or £5 a square meter before, is now you can get 27 decibels of sound cushioning, and it's only costing less than £1 a square meter or something like that. So that's another reason. It's slightly related and not related to your question. Sorry, I've gone a little bit off topic. I went slightly off topic there.
It's related to the next question, though, which is great.
Oh,
we've just got two questions left, everybody. If people need to leave, then obviously feel free to do so. If you're okay to just answer two more questions, Greg, is that okay?
Yeah, no problem.
So the next question was from Johanna, wondering what the noise impacts of some of these floorings options is if installed in an upstairs flat. What sort of soundproofing considerations might we consider?
Oh, this is my new favorite topic that I'm trying to learn everything about, is acoustics, because it gets raised so much. It will depend slightly on if you've got rules within the building, and if you've had carpet previously and you want to put a timber floor in, then there's certain products that you'll need to use, because you're going to have because carpet is obviously a fantastic sound insulator. It's got lots of air pockets. It's very soft, and it does all the things that you want for sound cushioning to do. Timber floors aren't generally noisy. They're not noisy like a tile would be, for example. They're much they're much quieter than that, but they are still a hard flooring type. They're still a resilient flooring type. So they are, you are still going to get a little bit of that reflective walking sound and that transferred walking sound. So generally, you both in glued and floated installs, there are different levels that you can go to with those acoustic membranes. Sometimes going for a timber floor, if you've got to reach a really high level of acoustics, you might have to put in a layer of something really soft, then a layer of something harder, and then your timber floor, because you can't put the timber floor directly on something really soft because it's going to feel really wallowy. So you need to spread the stress out. There's lots of products on the market and things. So it's worth looking around, and then the thing that's really going to dictate it is what acoustic level do you need to achieve and what floor do you want. And then it's about marrying them together, and if it works for you, or if there's and then if that doesn't work, what's the nearest option to achieve what you're looking for?
I guess maybe this is too simplistic, but is a glued down floor ever worse than a floating floor, or does it just depend on all those extras that you're putting in?
There are so many things. Acoustics. So the acoustic transfer from one apartment to another, it's not the floor and the underlay. It's what's the substrate, how thick is that, what's the ceiling in the apartment below, is there a void, or is it right up against the structural element? Is it a timber construction with joisted structure, or is it a concrete construction? These are the things. It's a very, very dense topic, acoustics. So it's generally no. it's easier with a floating. What I will say is it is easier with a floating floor. It's easier with a floating floor to find a product where you can float your product over it and have an acoustic layer. But it doesn't mean that if you need to achieve really high level of acoustic, that you won't also have to put that layer in, overboard it with something, and then put your timber floor in. That might still be the case. It just depends on how far you need to go with those acoustics. Yeah,
I think what the good thing is that there's definitely stuff you can do, and it's worth looking into it with your flooring supplier or an acoustic person to try and work out the best option for you. You definitely can have a wooden floor and have happy neighbours as well. So
of course. I spend that's one of the things I spend a lot of time doing, is working with people, and they've got certain requirements for party building regs and things, and finding products that work for them, so that they can use the floor that they want and get the kind of that finish that they're looking for, but also meet the requirements of the project.
Okay, last question. Kelly, thank you. How do you install engineered boards around traditional balustrades and stairs? That's probably quite a tricky one, or maybe it's not.
It depends. It depends if you're looking to kind of glue down or not. If you're looking for a loose laid installation, then it can be quite tricky. Sometimes you just have to finish short of it and then find a nice trim that meets up and everything kind of marries together nicely. Put a little bead or something in there. A really good installer is going to be able to work around those traditional balustrades if with a glued down installation. They'll be able to work around that. That's part of the skill of hiring somebody who that's all they do is fit wooden floors day in and day out. That's where the really good guys are worth every penny, if I'm just being completely honest. That's where you're paying for the years and years and years of experience to be able to achieve those types of installations. That's basically my advice is get the absolute best installer.
Great.
In that situation.
Oh, well, we're going to draw to a close there, but thank you so much, Greg, for being with us today. And of course, obviously there's a lot to go through in lots of different specific situations, and Havwoods is a great place to go and get all that advice on your specific situation. They've got amazing showrooms all over the country, haven't you, where you can go in?
So the showrooms are we've got showrooms in Guildford, 2 in London, in Chelsea and Clerkenwell. We've also got a showroom just off the M6 in, this is embarrassing,
in Cheshire.
In Cheshire. And also at our head office in Carnforth, which is just kind of which is Lancashire, just kind of right on the South Lakes.
There's a wealth of knowledge waiting there.
Lots of other options as well. Wooden floors is where Havwoods kind of was made, but we do lots of wall products, veneer products, lots of decorative panels, even some acoustic products made of timber and things. Really, if it's a surface is made of wood, we specialize in finding the right products for people.
Yeah. And I should also say you can get all your samples online, can't you? You don't have to go install. But I think getting that extra help is definitely worth it, and definitely worth having those conversations. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everybody who's asked questions. It's been amazing. And and thank you to all of those who are watching on the replay. Okay, well, that's it for this week. Thanks a lot, Greg.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.